In this video, I'm going to show how to install the Snort open source intrusion detection system on a Windows computer. In particular, I'm going to be using Windows 10 in this example, although the process is pretty much the same in Windows 7 or Windows 8 or 8.1 or even on a Windows server. And I'm also going to be using Snort version 2.9.8.2, which is the most recent release that came out earlier this spring in 2016. So a couple of disclaimers before we get started. This is just a basic install and configuration, what you would need to get set up and start experimenting with Snort on your own. Not going anything through like server hardening or getting Snort production capable or how you would run it in a real-world environment. That's beyond the scope of what I'm looking to do here. But do just want to go through the basics of installing the tool. So before you get started with the install, the first couple of things you need to do is to get Snort itself, and also to get some rules that you will need to so Snort can do something. So when you go to snort.org, this is the website you see. There's a nice Get Started link right at the top. If you click on that, you have all the different operating systems Snort will run on. You can click on Windows, and there's just one available, the Snort 2.9.8.2 installer.exe, and so you can just download that very easily. Then you're going to need some rules. You go back up here, you see a link for rules. Okay, and that will take you to this part of the page. Now there's three versions of Snort rules. There is what's called the community release, the registered user release, and the subscriber release. Community release, you don't have to log in, don't need an account, you can just download it. That's fine. The registered user release, you have to make an account on snort.org. It's free. No downside to doing it, but if you're the kind of person that doesn't want to register with a new website, then you can just use the community rules. They're structured a little bit different than the registered and the subscriber release, but I'll go through that when we get to that point. If you are really going to be running Snort all the time and you want the latest and greatest and always want the most up-to-date rule set, kind of like having the current updates for your antivirus signatures, then you might consider getting a subscription and getting the subscriber rules. Subscription is $30 a year for an individual. There are higher prices if you're running it for commercial use. Difference between the registered and the subscriber release is that the subscriber rules are frequently updated and always have the latest and greatest in them. The registered user release, when it's not paid, there's a delay before the full updated rule set is released, usually about 30 days. You can use either of these two. I'm signed into my account and I'm a subscriber, so I'm going to show the subscriber rules when I go through this, but the structure of the rules files for subscriber and registered are identical. So you can download either one of these. You just click on the link and save it locally to your computer. So when you're done with that, you'll have a couple of things in your downloads folder. All you need to do is go and open the downloads where they've come in. We've got the Snort installer, and we've got the Snort rule snapshot that comes down, which is a zip file. So the first thing I'm going to do is install Snort. So I'm just going to double click on the installer. I'm going to get a pop-up letting me know that it's okay. I have to agree on the license agreement just like with any other software. You can just leave all the defaults here. It doesn't take much space on your computer, just about 7 megs. You can pick a destination folder. On Windows, the default is always going to be sort of a root directory on your primary hard drive, so C:/Snort in this case. Click Start. Watch it go. Pretty fast process. Click Close. When you click Close and Snort has been installed, Snort is a packet sniffer. That's where it gets its network traffic off your network card. So it relies on Windows at least, it relies on the tool called WinPCAP. That is the packet capture utility library that runs with your network interface, so it can actually pull the raw network traffic off the wire. Or off the wireless if you happen to be running it that way. So you will get a prompt when you're done installing Snort that says, hey, we need WinPCAP. You should install that if you don't already have it. And here's where you can download it, and there's a link. The version referenced here is 4.1.1. The most current version of WinPCAP is actually 4.1.3. So if you go and download it, that'll be the one you're doing. If you already have a utility like Wireshark or any other packet sniffing tool, you probably already have WinPCAP installed. I already have WinPCAP installed, so I'm not doing that here. Pretty simple utility to install if you need it, but you do need it before you can run Snort, so make sure that you have it if you don't already. So after I install that, the easiest way to see what we've got going on is I can just open a command window here. That takes me to my C prompt. I can switch to the Snort directory. If you look there, you have a few directories here. The program itself is in the bin directory. And you can just type snort and a capital V for version, and it'll return, lo and behold, I have snort 2982 installed. So that tells me that the installation process worked. Not anything too exciting there, just verifying that the install has happened. If we go to the file structure, for C:/snort, here's the folders that get installed when you install snort. Again, bin is where the program itself is, some documentation and doc. etc is an important folder. It's where the configuration files live. We're going to spend some time in a second with snort.conf, which is the configuration file that has a lot of settings that need to be tailored to your local computer. There's a library file where some other programs live, logs, which is by default where output when you run the tool is going to go, and two different rules folders, one that's just called rules and the other that's preproc rules, preproc for preprocessor. So the next thing we're going to do is these files are empty when Snort gets installed. Preprocessor has some old versions of these, but we're going to put newer ones in with the newest rules package. So the next thing we're going to do is open the rules folder so we can copy the files that are in it into these two directories. So if we go back to our downloads folder, I'm going to open the Snort rules package, which is a tar archive zipped. I use a free utility called 7-zip. You can use any unzip tool that you want. In many cases, Windows will open this by itself. Very simple structure in 7-zip. When you open the archive, you've got 4 folders. You've got some etc files here again. You've got preproc rules, you've got rules, and you've got SO. SO is for shared object. Don't really work very well in Windows. They were designed to run on Linux and Unix platforms. So we're going to skip over the SO rules. You notice there wasn't a folder for those. But what we are going to do is deploy the rules and the preproc rules contents into those directories that I showed before. So if we open up the rules folder, you see a license file, and then you'll see quite a few files that end in the extension rules, rules. This is just how Snort categorizes different types of rules that are used in the program. The rules files are just text files. The .rules, you can open it in any text editor if you want to browse through one of them. But what we're interested in now is making sure that we have all these files where we want them. So we're going to extract them. We're going to go to C, Snort, rules. We're going to extract all the files there. Okay, so we're done with those. We can switch over to our directory structure and look at rules, and here's all the rules. The one that I will highlight right away is local.rules, which we're going to use in a second because this is where you put your own rules by default. When you install Snort, it's blank, but by convention, it's where your own custom rules go, where all these other ones actually contain rules that the Snort team actually produces. So the next thing we're going to do is go back here, move up one level, and go to preproc rules. There's only 3 files here, so we want all 3 of those. We're going to extract them to the folder by the same name. Snort, preproc rules. Now there's already 3 files there, so it's going to ask me if I want to overwrite. I'm going to say yes to all. The dates on these are quite recent, see May 9th. The older ones are quite a bit older, so we want the most recent versions there. So if we open preproc rules, we can see the new ones with the date of 5/9 on them. Then we know they're up to date. That's all we need out of the rules file. We don't need anything else that's in it, so we can just close that out. So the next thing that we need to do now that we have rules installed is we need to configure Snort so it's able to run. So we're going to go to the etc folder, and we're going to edit Snort .conf. The conf stands for configure. Now you can use any text editor to do this. I wouldn't recommend using Notepad because the formatting will be kind of a mess when you first open it. You could use WordPad. You could use another program if you want. My particular favorite is one called Notepad++. It's another free utility, sort of an improved version of Notepad that, among other things, shows line numbers. So that's what I'm going to choose. And so I've now opened this in Notepad++, and I'm going to do some editing of the file. So it tells you the version at the top of the file. The Snort configuration file is divided into 9 different sections where you can do different things. We're not going to touch on all of them, but we are going to touch on some of them. So first thing we do is we set some variables. So the first variable you have is HomeNet. This is where you designate what your local network is as opposed to what the external network is going to be. You can leave it on any if you want, but the general rule is that you would put here where your home IP address structure lives, either for the one computer you're using or for a group of computers. So here's one way to do that. Most home routers are running on 192.168.0.1 or 1.1 as a gateway. So that's sort of the address spacing you're using. If you're in a commercial environment where you're using a 10-dot structure, you could put that in instead, or 172 is the other sort of common one. So now we've declared the variable HomeNet to be this CIDR block of IP addresses. Now, if I'm going to use external.net as opposed to home.net, I want it to be everything that's not that. So I'm going to reference the HomeNet variable with the $sign. That's how I reference it, but I don't want it to be the same. I want it to be the difference, so I put an exclamation point there to negate it. Now, everything else you can leave the defaults here if you want. You can specify very specific servers in your environment if you expect to see certain activity or traffic on them. It's not really necessary. HTTP ports, for instance, if you're going to look at monitoring web traffic, you could filter this list down so it didn't have so many things in it. It has a lot of ports in it, as you can see, many of which people don't use, but most people expect to see 80 or 8000 or 8080, those kinds of things in there. But again, you can just work with the defaults for pretty much all of these. So we go down through the last variables for these AIM servers, and then we have some paths to change. Now, Snort configuration file by default has structures that look like they're designed for Linux or Unix. The slashes go / instead of \, and it uses some relative references. So what we want to do is make sure that these paths are accurate, and you see the guidance here for Snort, such as c:/snort/rules, which is the default directory for where the rules would live. So that's what we want to do. We want to take the rule path and we want to change it, including the \, to where we install those rules files. Now I'm going to comment out the shared object rules because we don't use them on Windows, so I'm just going to put a number sign or a hash character in the first field. That comments it out. And then in preprocessor rules, we're going to do basically the same thing. You remember the name of the directory when we were installing. That's where it lives on Windows. So now I've set my rule paths. I'm going to do that one more time with this same path for something called a whitelist and a blacklist. There's one of the preprocessors in Snort is called the reputation preprocessor. It allows you to block or allow or alert or allow IP addresses of sites that people may be visiting, and you have to define those IP addresses somewhere, so you need a place to put them, and I like to put them in the rules folder as well. So whether or not you choose to use this preprocessor, it's a good idea to set the path so that you don't get an error later if the folder doesn't exist. So that's it for step 1. In step 2, there's not very many things to change. You live with the defaults all the way across here. The one thing you do want to set on Windows in particular is the log directory. We're going to uncomment that, and we're going to put in snort log, which is the default location, but we do want to point to it so that Snort knows where to write its output when it's running. That's it for step 2. Nothing to change in step 3. You can leave all the default settings the way that they are. And we'll move down to step 4. Now in step 4, we're going to configure some of the libraries that Snort loads in when it starts up. Okay, we're only going to use 2 of these 3, but you see these directory structures are for Linux, and we need to make them correct for Windows. So you can double check for yourself if you want.
These are in the library directory. Here's where they are. See, there's two different folders here. Snort Dynamic Engine actually has a DLL in it that we're going to point to, SF Engine. And Snort Dynamic Preprocessor has a lot of things in it. We're just going to point to the directory there. So they're in C Snort lib. So we're going to change this one. So C : Snort lib. And change the slashes. We're going to change this one. So C : Snort lib Snort Dynamic Engine, and the name is different here. This is for Linux, and we're doing Windows, so it's, I showed you a second ago, it's sfengine.dll. Now we're not going to use dynamic rules, because we're not using the shared object rules on Windows, so we're just going to comment that third one out. Okay, then we get to preprocessors. Now there's a bunch of preprocessors in Snort. You can leave as many of them enabled as you want, or enabled others. There's even some in the documentation that aren't mentioned here by default. One of the things we're going to do is comment out this inline preprocessor. Snort does not run in inline mode on Windows. It's really a feature that's limited to Linux and Unix, so there's no reason to leave that running. We just comment it out. These other ones I just tend to leave in there. You know, packet fragmentation and stream and flow. Just going with the defaults on some of these other ones. And you've got back orifice detection. You can leave that or comment it out. FTP, SMTP, POP. You've got lots and lots of different protocols in here. You can leave or enable the port scan. That tells you if somebody's running a port scan against your computer. Just a lot of different things in here. So I'm going to scroll to the bottom of this step 5 that we're in about preprocessors, and I'm going to stop briefly at preprocessor reputation. So again, this is where you can configure blacklisted or whitelisted IP addresses. And if you do it, you have to give a path. So we set the path up before in step 1. We also need a file name. The two default file names they give here end in rules, which I've never really liked, because rules files hold rules, which have a very specific syntax in the Snort world. But blacklist and whitelist files are only allowed to hold IP addresses. That's all you can put in them. So I like to rename the file structure so that the file name so that it differentiates from using rules, because they're not really rules files. They just have lists of IP addresses in them. Now, what's important here is if I reference these two files in snort.conf, the files have to exist. So it's a good time as any. You know, maybe we should create them, because that's something that we're going to have to do. So we can create a new file here. I'm going to do a comment for the first character, and I'm going to say Snort whitelist file, list IP addresses here, 1 per line. Another comment there, and I'm going to save this. File, save as. Okay, I don't want an etc. I said before my path was going to be in rules. So I'm going to name this white.list, because that's the name I gave it in the reputation preprocessor. Okay, now if I change this to blacklist, I can just save it again, file save as. I'm going to call it black.list and save it. So now we're done with those. I need those files to be there, or I'm going to get an error when I try to run Snort, and I don't want an error when I run Snort. So if we look back in the rules file, you've got the black.list and you've got white.list. Now, as I said, they're empty, but that's okay, but the files still have to exist. Okay, so now we're done with step 5 in all our preprocessors. So we go down to output plugins. On Windows, you're a little bit limited with what output plugins you're allowed to use. Typical, if you're running this in a real-world environment, you'd typically set up a syslog server to get the output. In this example, we're just going to do screen output, so I'm not going to set any output plugins at all. Down in step 7, now this is where you have where all your rules files get loaded. So all those ones I showed you in the rules directory, those get referenced here with these include files, and they just get loaded in at startup. The only thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to change the slashes. I want to replace the forward slashes to backslashes because it works better on Windows that way. I'm going to replace this one. I'm just going to go down this list and replace these. Now, you don't want to do a global replace for the whole program and for the whole configuration file because there are places in here that use CIDR notation for network IP addresses, and those slashes have to go the other direction. So if you do a global search and replace here and make them all backslashes, you're going to get some errors, which is why I'm doing them sort of more carefully this way. So all I did for step 7 is I just changed the slashes, but I'm leaving all these files enabled, so all these rules get loaded by default. You could filter some out if you want to your environment. Like you see things here that are specific to like Cold Fusion and Front Page or IIS. If you're not running those technologies, there's no real reason to run those rules, but we're just leaving everything up right now. What I want to do in step 8 now is I want to enable these 3 preprocessor rules that we added, so they do get loaded. And step 9 is really another listing like step 7, except it's for shared object rules, which we're not using. So I'm just going to leave those the way they are. So that's it. So we just sort of breeze through it, but we've set our Snort configuration file now, and we're sort of ready to go. So I'm just going to press save there, and I'm going to minimize this. And we're ready to test our configuration and see if it works. So to do that, we're going to have to open a command prompt. So I'm going to go down here. Type CMD, I get the command prompt. It's very important you run it as an administrator. You need administrative rights to run Snort. So I'm opening as administrator, and I say, yes, that's okay. I get my little window. Again, I have to switch to the directory where Snort lives, and I'm going to switch to the bin directory. Now, the one other thing you may not know when you're running Snort, when you start it, you have to tell it what network interface to listen on. Most Windows computers have 2 network interfaces at least, one for wired and one for wireless. You could have more than that. One way you can check what you're running is to run the command snort and a capital W, and it will return a numbered list of interfaces. And as you can see, I've got 5 on mine. It's a little bit unusual compared to some folks. I have 5 because I have virtual machines running on my computer sometimes, although I'm not running one right now. It's not always easy to tell which network interface you want, which is a little bit of a challenge for some people. But at least this gives you the listing in numerical order, and you can see which of your adapters are available and make a decision about which one you want to run with. Okay, that's really all you need to do there. So what we're going to do first is we're going to validate the network, configuration. So we're in the right directory to run Snort. We're just going to use a standard startup command, which is the keyword snort. Okay, you typically designate an interface. You use 4 in this case. Yours may be different. You got to check that. You need a space between. That's a dash I, lowercase I, and then the interface number. Then you have to designate the configuration file. You use a dash C for that. You put in the full path to your configuration file, which in this case is snort. It's an etc and the full name of it. Okay. You can designate other things at this point if you want, but for right now all we're trying to do is test it. So we're going to put in a capital T there, and we're going to run it. Oh, made a mistake. You can tell it's in real time. So if I go back here, I think I left this slash on, so let's take that out. It tells you what line it's in, so you can see why it's handy to have Notepad++, because it tells you that it's in line 250, and you can go right to line 250 and figure out where the error is. So let's try that again. That's better. Can't find any whitelist, blacklist entries. That's okay. Didn't put them in. Those files are empty, as I said before. Snort's still loading. What you're looking for when you run Snort, is a message at the end of the startup procedure that says commencing packet processing. It goes through a lot of load up steps, and you see a lot of messages as it goes about all the different configuration settings. But what you're looking for is just the end state. Now, because I put a dash T at the end, all I'm doing is testing the configuration. So if I pass, all that's going to happen is I'm going to get a message at the very end that says the configuration's been validated, and then we can move on to running it for real. Just waiting for it to finish loading here. And there it is. Snort successfully validated the configuration, Snort exiting. So it doesn't actually start up when you put the -T at the end. So before we're actually ready to run, we want to see if it's generating any alerts. So the way we do that is we have to make some rules. I'm just going to do some very simple testing rules that will basically alert all the time. I'm going to open this local.rules file. I'm going to open it in Notepad. So this just tells you some information about where you want to put your rules. So without going into all the details, you can go look at the Snort manual yourself on the Snort website, but the rule syntax, the keyword for an alert is alert. You need to designate typically a source, and then an arrow, and a destination. This is IP address or range and ports, but I'm just doing any of them. And you also need to do a protocol. You can do IP, which is anything, or you can do ICMP, UDP, or TCP. So we're going to do an ICMP alert here. Message, testing ICMP, alert. Now that's going to, because I don't have any criteria, that's going to alert on any ICMP packet that comes through and generate an alert. So there's my message, and I have to provide a signature ID. That's required. By convention, when you write your own rules in Snort, you start above 999999. So I'm just going to make this one 1,000,001, and that's a rule. If I do another one for UDP, same structure, just a different protocol. I need a different number because these all have to be unique. There's 2 rules. Alright, now I got one for TCP. So now I'm done. So I'm going to save this file. And now I'm going to run Snort again, and I have these rules, which means that I should be generating some traffic. If you're running a home network and you have a UDP rule active, you're going to get lots of traffic right away because there's all sorts of activity on your home network. That's just the way things work. So it makes it pretty easy to test stuff. Now, I'm not testing anymore, so I'm going to use the same startup command, but I'm going to use -A console, which is going to direct output of whatever happens, whatever alerts come up, to the screen, to the same command prompt where I'm running. So this time when it runs, what I'm hoping to see at the end of this process is no errors, and also seeing a statement that says commencing packet processing, and then I want to see some alert traffic. If I don't see any alert traffic immediately, then I can always go and generate some. I can open up some other web pages. I could open up another command window and do some ping somewhere to generate some ICMP traffic. You can pretty much do all the testing you want. There's lots of testing rules you can create. But the idea here is just to verify that Snort is actually generating alerts. So you have to be patient when Snort starts up. You can leave it running as long as you want once it's open. Not running it as a service, you can run it that way as well if you really want it to run all the time on your computer. But for experimental purposes, usually you want to be able to start and stop it yourself as things go along. Alright, so commencing packet processing, and we see lots and lots and lots of alerts, UDP and TCP alerts. The UDP is not surprising because I'm on a home network. The TCP is not surprising because I have a web page up in the background, and that's enough to make sure that I get some of that. So look, we're generating alerts. So I can hit Control-C and terminate it. Every time you stop Snort, you get some information about what just happened for however long it was running. Sessions, how many packets came through, how many alerts fired, so you can always inspect those if you want. But there we have it. So Snort is working. It's generating alerts on our test rules, and we're pretty much ready to go now and get more sophisticated about the the types of alerts that we might want to create. So there you have it. That's the process. Start to finish, you can do it in less than 20 minutes if you don't make too many mistakes while you go.